Isn't it weird that some of these comedians have podcasts that way outshine their stand-up?
His whole body just erupts.
I remember when I first discovered Joe, and he would talk about the old days of the Comedy Store and how hard it was being an up-and-coming comic and slowly earning respect, and I thought, okay, I gotta check out his stand-up. I must be out of touch because this guy sounds like he's really good. Then I saw it and I thought, wow, what the hell was that? But maybe it's just me. Comedy is subjective. But it's something I've noticed with a few other comedians. On podcasts, they're great. They're funny and easy to listen to. Good storytelling with wild and hilarious takes. But then I'm underwhelmed when I watch their stand-up.
What do you think we should do to get out of this predicament? Middle Eastern guy next to the carpet? He's looking at me like, the fuck you want me to do? It's a whole pack of hyenas. I'm like, motherfucker, there's a whole new world. If we just get on this goddamn carpet and go to safety. Show me the world, okay?
With Bill Burr or Chappelle, I've seen them on a podcast and their stand-up is way funnier. I watch their stand-up and I'm like, yeah, that's their purpose. With comedians, I always got the impression that podcasting was more the side gig and their stand-up is what they were truly passionate about and what they've been put on this earth to do, to make us pedestrians feel good. But it's starting to feel like the opposite. Normally I would say who cares, and there's definitely been a positive effect on comedy in a lot of ways. I'm sure we've all discovered comedians that you would probably never have come across if it weren't for exposure on a podcast. But I think podcasts have also had a negative effect on comedy in a couple of ways. First, some of you might say, okay, well, the specials aren't rated that bad and these comedians obviously sell out shows, so people must really like their jokes. However, a lot of those who go out to watch their shows, I don't think are there entirely for the stand-up. I think they're there to see their favorite podcaster. If Rogan was in my city, I sure as hell wouldn't go to his stool humping exhibition, but a part of me would think it would be cool to maybe try and get a picture with Rogan. If I'm a fan of a podcast, why not go to watch them live and potentially get to meet them? So I think we have a lot of arena touring comedians who are simply not that great, which has resulted in some of these so-called top-level comics getting this inflated ego as if they're up there with some of the greats, due to the fact that they're selling just as many tickets. I think we've all noticed the ego of certain comics just getting a little out of control, and of course that can be expected with more success, but sometimes it just feels like it's hitting delusional territory. If you look at times where people have tried to sing the praises of Louis C.K. or Bill Burr or even Shane Gillis, they get visibly uncomfortable with compliments. And then there's others who can't stop complimenting themselves or bragging about their wealth.
And you know what? You only have what you have because of fans, so don't talk about us like that. Yeah, but you're still a loser if you're thinking like that. So you're maybe, I'm lucky to have you as a loser fan, but you don't have to be that way.
I mean, this is going to sound so fucking pretentious, but like people do free, they'll be like, gas went from $3.50 to $4. And it's like, what is that, $5 extra?
I know, but I think
fill up the tank?
I think that affects the price of every good then, because you got to transport it. Transportation
of course,
costs
of
go
course,
jams
of course.
everybody up.
Flights go up. All that shit.
Yeah. I will say that's something that I learned from like making money is that like you care so much less about shit. And then the people who are way more wealthy that care, you're like, man, you don't really care about that shit. Like, it's all a game.
It's so funny. A comic's brain is so different than a pedestrian's brain. And like what, like I can't help.
Pedestrian is so funny, by the way.
Oh,
like saying that we're not in the armed force. Let's relax.
There's a lot of people that overuse that
They really
civilian.
do. It's like we are so lucky we get to do this.
Yeah.
Any person on the street I respect more than even my favorite comic. Let's get that out there.
Man, I just love that Stavros called that out. I guess more power to Bird. People love watching him. On the one hand, he comes across as goofy and down to earth, but on the other hand, he's basically pointing out how special he is.
I mean, don't you feel a little bit like, I don't know. Don't you feel like you're special?
Now, let's get to the second reason. I remember when someone was on Rogan debating if comedy was the last true meritocracy. Rogan, of course, agreed, and their explanation made sense. If you're not funny, the crowd should let you know. But I don't think that's necessarily still the case.
There's about stand-up I didn't know.
Yeah.
And one of them is that there's some automatic laughs
that you're getting.
Whether people like you or not, I think plays a big part in whether they find you funny or not. I mean, it's proven that generally women find attractive men funnier. So telling jokes isn't the only factor at play. If people like you or you've been hyped up by a prominent figure, then we can be tricked into thinking you're the real deal. Joe even fooled us into thinking Sharp was a comedian, and a major network gave him a special. I guess he was saving his friend from getting his head bashed in any further, and some would say, who cares, it's Showtime who lost money, but there were probably a lot of other comics that deserved that opportunity.
Dicey.
I remember watching Schultz's special and doing the whole pre-order thing on his website. I watched it and I thought, yeah man, that was mid. It wasn't bad, there were a few chuckle-worthy moments, and I'm sure if I was there watching it live, I probably would have found it funnier, but I would argue that he's a better podcaster than a comedian. Just my opinion, let me know if you guys disagree in the comments. But no regrets, it felt like I was supporting a comedian that I enjoyed watching every week. Some of these comedians, let's face it, would be nowhere near as successful if Daddy Rogan didn't have the biggest podcast in the world. And guess what? 95% of the comedians that Joe puts on have their own podcasts. I mean, he kept telling everyone to start podcasts, and they did. And now they all do each other's podcasts to further promote their podcasts. Some of them only do good numbers when they have huge guests on. Let's look at the Whitney Cummings Good For You podcast, where her episodes with popular guests can get 200,000 to 300,000 views, but a low-profile guest can barely get 20k. That tells me, in Whitney's case, most people are only there for the guests. It used to be that the only way a comedian really made it is when they got their own show or ended up on SNL or in a movie. Now, another way is when they end up on Rogan. He's a new Hollywood gatekeeper, whether he likes it or not, and some of these comics have rightly earned their spot. Shane Gillis, Mark Norman, even our boy Schultz, who's got an ego for sure, but he's talented. But I think there's now a distortion with the level of talent comedians have and their success. When comics like Bobby Lee or Rogan would describe their journey, man, it sounded hard. With years of getting booed off stage and networking, now if your podcast is doing good numbers, that's an indication that people like your comedy. This also applies to your social media. And don't get me wrong, that part is great. It's giving exposure to a lot of comics that deserve it. But I'm just highlighting that there is also a downside to this. Let's look at the facts here. Bert Kreischer, according to ticket sales, is a top 5 comic in the world right now. At one point in time, Brendan Schaub was selling out shows. This guy is still touring, by the way. Now, there are plenty of industries that are not meritocracies. Just look at female rappers, right? Where there's this crazy coincidence that the prettiest and sluttiest just happen to be the best female rappers. There are clear gatekeepers and larger machines that push these talents in our faces. I just think that comedy is sadly no different. Rogan and his friends need to stop pretending like it's the last true meritocracy, because clearly it isn't. And who knows if it really ever was a true meritocracy, but it certainly isn't anymore. I don't think there's any shame if a comedian is much more successful as a podcaster than a comedian. Podcasting is still a hard thing to do, especially if you're interviewing different people all the time and have to keep the conversation going. I just think that some of these comedians should be known as podcasters first and comedians second, since that's where most of their bread and butter is coming from.
My wife calls me a successful podcaster and not comedian. I'm like, you... She's like, yeah, well, you're a podcaster. I'm like, I'll fucking fight you right now, lady.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my weird opinion. Maybe I'm thinking about this all wrong, so please let me know what you guys think in the comments. Also, if there are any comedians you can think of where they're so much more funnier on a podcast than their stand-up, let me know in the comments. I got a few ideas, but I'm eager to see what you guys think. If you enjoyed this, hit the like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.
Stool f***ing, if it's the right bit, can be funny.
Really?
But it has to be it has to be a real comic with a real reason to f*** that stool. There has to be something to it.